Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by the fantastic writer and director, Nikole Beckwith, who is the writer and director of Together. And I wanted to start by diving into your script writing process, because I love the way that you describe how you tend to write a lot of scenes that aren't necessarily for the final version of the script, but really, a 15-page scene about two characters deciding what to have for dinner, and how that might influence the overall narrative and structure and give you such a sense of who they are. And so I was interested if that's always been part of your script writing process, or how that really developed, and particularly for this film, how it helped to evolve these two characters.
It has always been my script writing process. I never studied writing or film. And the first film script that I ever wrote, Stockholm, Pennsylvania, was adapted from my stage play of the same name. But the play had a lot of like monologues and like a letter writing back and forth conceit that would be impossible in real life, and just a few elements. So when I started writing it, I was trying to figure out just like how to do it. I would write and realize I'm like, oh, I'm on a page 110 and nothing's happened yet. Like nothing has occurred. But I did know the characters a lot better. And so then I would just start over and start over and start over. And I would be like, well, now I'm on page 75, but nothing's happened. Okay, let's start over. And I would never refer back to the pages that I wrote before. I would just start again and feel like, okay, well, I got that out of my system and now I'm more focused. So it just kept getting shorter and shorter as I went on. And I didn't think about it as like my process. But when I sat down to write the script, it was just kind of like the same thing. But because I wasn't working off source material, I didn't experience it as, oh, nothing's happened. Like I was just writing, just trying to see into the world and into the people, because with Stockholm, I had spent 2 years on it as a play. So I was like already very aware of the characters in the world. And so yeah, it's almost kind of like I'm watching the characters in my mind, and it's just like unedited documentary footage. Like I am just following them from point A to point B to point Z, and just kind of chronicling like everything they're doing in the day. And then I would be like, I'm on page 100 and nothing's happened yet, but I do know these characters very well and what's going on with them. And so like kind of slowly over just writing hundreds of pages of dialogue, the story starts to reveal itself. And then after a certain point, I was just like, okay, now I'm like ready to begin the actual film. And then I just open a new blank document and I'm like, okay, scene one. And I don't outline, and I only write chronologically. I could never, it's just a different type of mind, I think, that can be like, oh, I'm going to write this scene and then I'll figure out like all the beats they need to get them there. And I understand that as like dramatic posts or pillars in the story and then filling in the blanks. But my mind just doesn't work that way. I'm like, how would I know how to write that scene unless I'm like ushering them there step by step? So it does, I do kind of just feel like a stenographer or like an imaginary documentarian, just like writing down like, and she's just like looking through a catalog, checking her email and like, I don't know, it's just it's a way to spend time with them. And I think because together is such an internal story, everything that's happening for Matt and Anna is really very internal. It obviously comes out in their actions, but it's not like there's not an earthquake, there's not any like big external circumstances that they're dealing with other than the circumstance that's brought them together. So I found that the process was very helpful for that, because getting to know the characters was just paramount to being able to understand what those shifts are and how they would express themselves. I don't know. Yeah, it's a windy process. I can't imagine they ever teach anyone to write that way. Writing programs would be 100 years long in that case, but it works for me, and I enjoy it. I really like spending time with the characters. So yeah.
And I've heard you mention that, you know, when you're writing those types of scenes, especially that everything tends to be very dialogue heavy a lot of the time. And when you look at the outcome of this film, one of the really beautiful aspects of it is the moments in between. And there's a lot of quiet moments where each of the characters kind of like regresses internally, like you were saying. And even for Patty's character, there's a moment when she fully kind of shuts down and stops talking for several scenes in the movie. And so was that something that when you were working on early drafts of the script was always part of it, like that intimacy, or did you start with more dialogue and then look at where you could start stripping it away to create more of that intimacy?
The quiet's always there, because like when I'm writing these, you know, introductory pages, there are pages and pages of like, Anna's brushing her teeth. She puts her toothbrush down. And it's like, I'm describing in extreme detail how she's touching everything, what she's thinking as she's doing that. And that is a way, that's like it's a very intimate thing. It's like living with someone, you know? And so it is like doing that. And then, like I said, I never reference what I've written before. I think that if it stays with me enough to come out on the pages again, it belongs there. And if I can't find it, if it doesn't naturally come back to the page, then it doesn't belong there. And so the quiet moments that we have rose to the top of like, it's telling me something here, and it goes back in. But yeah, I love the quiet as much as I love the dialogue. I think that that's like, those are the two poles. I think it's like I'm either writing like an 11-page scene while they're doing like baby shower invitations, talking about, there's so much of that scene too that's not in there. They talk about so much in that scene, and then there's like, you know, like a string of silent silent spying on them or whatever. And so it's very funny. There's no like medium space. I don't even know what that medium space would be, but yeah.
And then I wanted to talk about working with Ed Helms and Patty Harrison in the film, because both of them have mentioned how this was a different type of role and character for them to play, both in different reasons. For Patty, you know, this being kind of like one of her first leads in a feature, and for Ed just playing something that was a bit more stripped down. And these characters really focus on the humanity and the vulnerability. And when they've described how they tend to work a lot of the times, both of them, it sounds like, will often do a bigger take and then start to pare it down. And so in working with them on this film, was that part of the process and the journey of working with them, that you would start with kind of a certain exposition and then figure out how you could continue to pull it in a little bit more? Or did you find a lot of that nuance early on in takes?
I think it depended on like the nature of the scene, and also like where we were in the process with each other. I definitely think like the deeper we got into filming, and the more intimate the scenes became, the more the nuance was like right there from the beginning, you know. And we didn't shoot strictly chronologically, but we did stack the schedule so that like the more intimate, more one-on-one stuff was happening later in the shoot, for that reason, kind of to just be like to mirror the experience of the surrogacy and the filmmaking. And so yeah, it was funny. I mean, sometimes it would be like, you know, it's hard because they're both so hilarious and like geniusly gifted comedians, and they would do a take and we would all be killing ourselves laughing, and then I would be like, all right, now like in more, and then it's like we laugh a little less, in the next take, and then we get to a take where like everyone in the room is like hushed and like in love with them or something, and we'd be like, oh, there we go. But I think it's just like, I'll say a little bit, you know, obviously we talk before we do any take, but it's light. I want to see their instincts and I want to see like where they're going, and then like that's my compass, you know. So I don't come in heavy with like a lot of direction right off the bat. I'm like, okay, so like right before this happened, right after this happens, and like I think this is what the shift is in the scene, and then that's it basically. It's like, duh, obviously. And then we just go, and then I see where, because I think all comedy comes from vulnerability, and so it was just finding where that was coming from for them, and then finding it together and like unearthing it. And it was so fun. It was really, really fun, and their performances moved me every time I see even a clip of the movie. I'm like very prone to just like welling up and being like, oh. I really love those characters, and I really love their performances and how they brought these characters to the world. It's just, yeah, I feel very lucky.
And it sounds like overall that as a director, you tend to really allow your actors to kind of like dictate certain aspects of the scene, even down to some of the blocking. And okay, do you feel like your character would be sitting down? Do you feel like they would be moving around? Where do you think they would need to be physically within this space with what they're going through emotionally? And so I was really interested in just that journey of figuring out a lot of the scene blocking, a lot of the camera setups, because obviously you did shot list everything in advance, but how much that continues to shift and evolve when you're filming, particularly on a shoot that's as fast as this, but really paying heed and allowing the actors that space.
Yeah, I just want to see where, if there's movement in the scene, they're my compass. So it's like, they're really inhabiting these characters. So like those impulses, I would never be able to be like, and then you're gonna walk to the window, and then you're gonna. And so we just kind of like go through it, and I just want to see where their bodies want to go. Is there something that makes you want to walk away from this conversation? Is there something, are you wanting to shield yourself? Are you wanting to open yourself up? Like what's happening? And that's like the beauty of actors, is like, that's where they're trafficking, in all of those little instinctual, very human desires and fears and impulses. And so like, yeah, you want it to like flourish. But yeah, sometimes, and then, of course, you have to simplify it a little bit. So like they'd do a scene, we'd like write down where they're going. I would be like, try not to go past here, try not to go past this. Like we would have like a loose space that we knew that we were lighting. And then they would do a bunch of stuff. And then Frank, the DP, and I would like have marked, someone goes around with tape and like marks everywhere where they ended up. And then we simplify it because we're like, well, we can't turn the camera around like yet again for another angle. So we'll just like, I bet we could do from here to here. And then the actors come back. I show them the marks and how we simplified it. And then they're like, all right, and we go. And so it is like a real collaboration in that way.
And it sounds like there's a real intimacy in terms of where you're physically present on set a lot of the time when scenes are happening as well, whether it's being shoulder to shoulder with your DP or sitting just directly out of frame. And how does that really change the intimacy that you're able to have with actors, particularly when you're doing things like making scene adjustments and discussing, okay, this worked really well, but maybe we want to try a little bit more of this in the next scene, because it just allows a different level of intimacy when everyone on the crew isn't overhearing it and it's not being projected across people.
Yeah, I just have nothing to compare it to because that's what I've always done. I've only worked with like DPs who are also operating the camera, whether they like it or not, just because like that's those are our resources. But I'm not a DP, so I personally love knowing it's the DP and it's like, and I'm right there and we're feeling it out. And there were a lot of times where it's like, I just like squeeze Frank's arm and it's like he knows that either means to move or to stop moving or like whatever it is. It's like this yeah, very on top of you language. And then also, yeah, I don't want to like be yelling, there's that like whatever the iconic idea we have of a director of like having the bullhorn being like, do this. It's like I can't imagine that. I do feel like it's almost no one else's business what is being said, and And sometimes it's something for both actors to hear. Sometimes it's something for just, they need things to hear privately. And so it is helpful when you're right there. And I also like, I don't cut very much. I reset. So you just like keep rolling. And that's also helpful. I mean, like you have to be right there to do that. It's like, you can't just keep rolling while I'm like walking in from Video Village, like wherever that is. And like, you know, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, you can only really go that way when I'm like, okay, reset. And I'm right here and I'm telling you a thing. And then like, we're just going. And I think that that's just like helpful and nice, but obviously I want to see what it looks like in my monitor, but I also want to feel what it feels like between the two people in real life, because that's what it's all about, like those two things. So it's like, I have to be planted firmly right in the middle of that. And that is potentially from having worked in theater. So that's what it's all about, is like how it feels in the room, you know? And so that's probably connected to that somehow. I don't know. I mean, I hope that it's like okay with everyone, but I'm like really like right there. Like there are funny, like in the edit, you'd be like, oh, we see my knee. So like I shifted or whatever, like I cross my legs and you see my knee dip into the shot. I'm like, so we blow that up a little. Sorry, Frank. Yeah, and it's like, I hope that's okay with everybody, because that's how I roll. I warn everyone, the DP and the actors, that I'm like right there.
I also wanted to ask you about the soundtrack and the music that you came up with your composer for this piece, because, you know, it really feels like you're not using the music to dictate what we should be feeling, but it still enhances the scenes a lot. And so how did you figure out what you wanted that tone to be, particularly because every single scene has such a myriad of emotional tones within it? You really capture that essence of, you know, something really heartbreaking is happening, but at the same time, there's a comedic moment, and then there's high drama and high stakes all at the same time. And I feel like the sounds and the music that you bring into the film really enhance that.
Oh, thank you. Alex Summers, our like very gifted, incredible composer, who I was like very lucky to know socially in Los Angeles. So nothing felt more Los Angeles than being like, let me just text this like very cool composer that I like hang out at barbecues with. And he had just done, you know, the soundtrack, the score for Honey Boy and for the Audrey Hepburn documentary, you know. So I did just like send Alex a text and was like, do you want to get in on this? And I think it was nice because we did have that like social rapport, and we were excited to get to work together, because like when we would see each other socially, we were always talking about work. And so this was exciting to get to talk about work together. And we were referencing like scores to like Nora Ephron movies of a certain era or whatever, these like these like iconic two-hander films of a certain tone. And they're mostly piano standards. And so we knew we wanted piano as the main sound, but we didn't want standards. But we did want the music to feel somehow nostalgic while also feeling like it's not emulating anything from the past. So like that was also a hard balance. And I think, you know, Alex has just such an incredible mind that like you can say something like that and he's like, you mean like this, which is incredible. And then also, you know, it was a new tone for both of us, me as a director and him as a composer. So that was also really nice, because it wasn't like an expectation being set that someone's trying to meet or whatever. It was us being like, is this it? You know, like, and so it was very trial and error, because like you said, there'd be, and it was hard too, because absolutely everything Alex made was beautiful. So it was so, you know, you just want all of it. And he made a ton of music. It was just, you know, incredible. But we would be listening to things over scenes and be like, oh, that's so funny. That really works for this comedic moment, but it's just a little too buoyant it's steamrolling the emotional underpinning. And then the reverse would also happen, right, where I'd be like, oh my gosh, this music is so gorgeous in this emotional moment, but it kills the joke or whatever. And so that was like very experimenting and like hit or miss. And also like the opening cue is also so hard. It was the hardest cue, I think, was that opening cue where it's like, okay, it has to be all of those things. It changes and moves and also has no hook. And so like that was also, I was like, make a piece of music like you're just sitting at the piano, like fumbling around with like no rhyme or reason to it, and you don't know when it's going to end or like anything. And it was just like, that's so hard, and he did such an amazing job. And I think like Alex is also like a musician and producer, like outside of score. Like I believe he began in just music. And I think that is incredibly helpful when you are creating a score that feels less like a speech and more like a dialogue. So it's not necessarily telling you exactly what to feel. It's just supporting all of the various feelings that come up through the scene. And I think that his songwriting work and like making albums with other, like, I think that helps, because I do feel like one of the reasons why we connect to music so deeply is that it's a dialogue with us and our feelings, not telling us what to feel. And so I do think that gift, like having that gift as well, is really opens up different pockets in your mind. So to have someone that is a gifted musician and music producer and also a gifted composer, it's like, wow, you're the whole package. And look at me being so lucky that I'm someone that like hangs out at barbecues with you and can like tap you on the shoulder and be like, come do this with me. But it was also funny because we did it during quarantine. So working on this score together where we talked all the time was also the least we'd ever seen each other in person. Like we didn't do anything in person. And so that was also funny because we went from like just talking about like the weather or whatever in person all the time and just being like, oh yeah, did you see so and so, to working really intensely on something as a pair and not ever looking each other in the eye or whatever. So that was it was a funny shift.
And then in terms of color always says so much on screen, and there's a lot of thoughtful use of it throughout the movie. But in particular, it goes one step further because you have that really beautiful scene where Ed Helms' character is trying to decide what color to paint the nursery. And it captures so much of his character because it's all about, he just wants it to be so perfect. And all of his anxiety feels like it's coming out in that moment, because it's like, if I pick the wrong color, is everything else that I do as a parent going to be a mistake? And when they're having that discourse about, well, this color feels like this and this color, evokes this emotion, it doesn't feel like you just put up some paint swatches and then we're like, just point to some of them on the wall. It feels like it was very pointed in terms of, okay, we're going to have these palettes over here, even just aesthetically, the way they look on the wall, and then how you really use them to evoke these aspects of these characters. So I wanted to ask very specifically about the use of color and how you used it to convey so much in that particular scene.
Oh, wow. Yes. And color, that green color that spoiler alert, they paint the nursery dusty blue green. But that color is like described in the script. And Ashley Fenton, our production designer, brought me in and like had all of these dusty blue green colors or whatever, and was like, but this one is my favorite. And I was like, yes, that's the color. And then you kind of build around there. I mean, I think funnily enough, that is being like, okay, so here's the thing that we need to get to, so now we're going to fill in all the things to get them there. And so yeah, she created that color palette as like a journey to that color, and then props, with the swatches and arranging them on the wall exactly so, and then having to do it all again really quickly as like, watching us like slowly tear off each color in a certain, pattern, and then so slowly, and then being like, but you have 3 seconds to put it back exactly as it was. They're like looking at pictures, but we tried to do it as chill as possible. But it's also like that color too comes in a few other places in the film. And our costume designer, Elizabeth Warren, also very gifted in color. So Ashley and Elizabeth had worked together before. And then, so we were all working on this color palette. So it's like, okay, so this is Matt's color story, this is Anna's color story. And together those color stories make this green color. So that's the like uniting. So you see it in the restaurant at their first date, you see it in the birthing class and in the hospital, like these moments of like undeniable overlap and connectivity between them. And then like so color is such an incredible, it evokes so much. I mean, as Matt says, I mean, like Matt's anxieties about the color are not so unlike my thought process going into like, what are we saying with each thing? But like one of my favorite things said is like, he's like, oh, this looks like an old PC. Like that was Ed improvising as Matt. And it's just like, wow, that's such a brilliant Matt connection, because he's this like digital, computer, it's a science guy. And I really loved it. Like that moment. So like also developing the characters' relationships to each color and like why they liked them or didn't like them. And that's like one of the very pivotal scenes in their relationship. Like the first tectonic shift is that scene. But yeah, I loved it because it's like a scene where they're coming together and their relationship is pivoting this way, and also a scene where production design, props, costume design, the gaffer, and the DP, like where it all comes together, the color of the costumes and everything on the wall and the way that it's lit and the way that it's shot. Like, so something that was so focused on that was such a beautiful, and like, it was like all of us were the characters. Like they were all, they were all the writers of that scene kind of, because everything that's visual is so integral to what's going on. So that was one of my favorite scenes to like design with them and shoot, because it was so overtly collaborative.
And then in terms of directing, there's always so much conversation about how the crew are there to really support the director's vision and to lift them up. And not to say that it's not true, but I really appreciate the fact that you've kind of said it's the other way around, and that as a director, it's your job to lift the crew up and to help them do the best work. And, I think we talk a lot about director relationships with actors and how they support them and, help pull out the best. And so I actually wanted to ask, in working with the rest of the crew, how you really find the approach with them and the type of environment that you try to create on set to allow them to do their best work as well.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, the crew, the unsung heroes of like literally everything you've ever seen. I think when I made my very first film, I had never been on a film set before. So I was like walking onto a film set for the very first time in my life with all of these people that had been doing it for years, coming together with like faith in the vision and faith in the story. And that was unignorable to me in that moment, because I was like, and I'm a total novice. So like my gratitude for their investment in the project and faith in me as like a director leader was like I stood up, like they're like, oh, do you want to make a crew speech? And I was like, oh God. And then I was like, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know anything. Like, I don't know what an apple box is. I'm so sorry. So like, if I'm in your way, tell me I'm in your way. If I can be making your life easier somehow, let me know. Like this is a I'm learning every day. So like, I think my relationship with the crew on the first film was so intimate because of that. And I was like very vulnerable, just being like, I don't know, sorry. That's just the way that I experience that relationship. Like I feel like, and they also work on so many more films in a year, you know what I mean? It's like, and I'm like a jealous girlfriend or something, being like, you have you get to go out all the time. you're seeing all sorts of people and all sorts of stories, and I miss you. But I think like, you know, you're getting up very, very early in the morning. You're working very, very long hours. And I think the best thing that you do as a director is you hire well. You hire department heads who are not only very good at their job, but very good people and kind. And then they hire really well. You know what I mean? And then you walk on a set and you just have this incredible team. And I think, yeah, you all have to be empowering each other to make the best work. I really think that like the idea that everyone is there to serve the director's vision is a product of toxic masculinity. Like, I think that that's like one of the more toxic ways that you could look at something. And there are so many bodies on a set working so hard, and I think it's silly to like split hairs on like whose job is harder or whatever. And I also really hate the vocabulary of above the line and below the line. Like, that is gross to me. And so yeah, I think like you're each other's every day. Like, I wanna walk onto a set if I have to be awake at 4:30 in the morning, and I'm not gonna sit down again until I go to sleep. Like, I want to be happy, and I want people to be happy to see me. And there was one day on set where I like mid shoot where something had happened and I had become very stressed out, and I came to set the next morning just kind of like, hi, like I was just like a little more reserved. Immediately everyone was like, are you okay? Like, what's up? Like, I was just like not like I was more internal and more withdrawn. I wasn't like crabby or anything, but everybody immediately picking up on that and being like, what's up? Was really nice. Number one, immediately shook me out of that space, and also was like a big indicator of like, right, if that's me being like a little sulky for a minute is like the town crier's like extra real about it, like Nikole's a little bummed, then like you have a really amazing set. Everybody's really in tune with how everyone's doing, how everyone's feeling. And yeah, I always watch a movie credits all the way to the end. And I feel ridiculous for ever having walked out of a movie in my teen years or whatever as the credits start going. Like, that's so ridiculous. And so I love watching all of the credits. And now, of course, sometimes you're like, oh, oh, Chris is on this. Oh, Chris is great. You know, you start to recognize names and stuff. But I think like film is a deep collaboration, and the more you think of it that way and the more you operate as a community instead of as like a dictatorship, the nicer it is for everyone and the more fun it is. And I do think that like, especially as a woman, I do think there's like the idea of being a director, the idea of leading a set has come from toxic masculine ideals. And so like some of it is like, yeah, you got to go on the set and be like a boss or like a boss bitch. I hate those. I hate that whole vocabulary. And it's like, right, yes, but you can also be open and vulnerable and soft. I think like I'm not afraid of softness. I'm not afraid of, you know, when I'm like, okay, what I need is this. And then if your props person or whoever you're talking to, if there's like a flash in their eyes where you're like, is that terrible for you? Or like, what do you need also? And so that we can find the thing that we can need together so that you don't have to be stressed and I don't have to be stressing you out. And then lo and behold, it's perfect. The thing that was way easier and less stressful for you to do while you're doing 100 things also works. So like, just creating that space makes everything better. And you can lead with softness. You can be vulnerable. And I think especially when you're asking actors to come and be vulnerable for all to see, I also want to show up and be vulnerable. You can't just be asking people to be vulnerable for you. You also have to be open and vulnerable with them. And why would you reserve that just for the people on camera? Yes, I am open for everyone that is showing up here. I'm vulnerable. I am like, I want to be as generous and present as I can be, you know, because that's what you're asking. And so, yeah, I'm like a Muppet. I direct like a Muppet. I don't feel like I have to emulate like boss bitch attitude, or like I'm a badass like lady director. It's like, no, I'm just, you know, you can just be a person, and we can change the way we think of like dynamics. Again, it's that bullhorn. So like, no, thank you. That's not fun. It's just not fun.
No, absolutely. And I'm now thinking about how great the industry would be if every single set ran in exactly that way. And I want to congratulate you on this film. There's so much beautiful emotional complexity that you've managed to weave into it. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you. Sorry, my answers are so long. I usually warn everyone. I've been quarantining alone for a year. So it's like I get on these interviews and I'm like, oh my gosh, settle in for this is the first time I've heard my voice in 3 days. So anyway, thank you very much for talking. Thank you for supporting the film. Sorry for being so long-winded. Sorry, public, for being so long-winded.